Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us, may He sustain us, may we grow in strength together, may our study together be fruitful, and may we not hate one another. Peace, peace, peace. Okay, so we're in part 1, chapter 3 of the Katha Upanishad. And first I'll read the verses we've covered already. So the two, the individual self and the cosmic self, enjoy the fruits of actions, residing in the cave of the intellect, which is the best place for self-realization. To those who wish to cross over the ocean of worldly experience through sacrifices, the Nachiketa fire stands out as the fine bridge. We know of this fire, and we can also perform it. We also know of the way that takes you to the other shore, where you become one with Parva Brahman, Brahman without attributes, and you attain fearlessness. Consider the embodied soul as the master of the chariot, the body as the chariot, the intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as the reins. Wise people describe the senses as horses, and the body as the chariot. Objects, sounds, forms, etc. are like roads for the horses. The self, together with the body, mind, and senses, is the enjoyer. If the intellect is incapable of discriminating between right and wrong, and is also connected with an uncontrolled mind, it is like a charioteer who has to deal with uncontrollable, vicious horses. When a person has a discriminating intellect, and has that intellect always joined to a mind that is under control, and his senses are also under control, then he is like a charioteer who has well-trained horses to handle. He whose intellect is not able to discriminate between right and wrong, and whose uncontrolled mind lets his senses run after impure things, in other words, things detrimental to spiritual progress, such a person can never attain self-knowledge. On the contrary, he gets caught up in the cycle of birth and death. The person who has a discriminating intellect and also has a controlled mind is always pure in thought, speech, and action. Such a person is sure to attain his goal of self-knowledge. Having once attained that goal, he will not be born again, in other words, be subject to birth and death again. He whose intellect, like a good charioteer, takes him along the right path, whose mind is under the control of the intellect, and who by virtue of such a combination can direct his senses as he thinks best, he can go to the other side of the world, where he attains the highest goal, union with the cosmic self. Superior to the sense organs are their corresponding objects. Superior to these objects is the mind. Superior to the mind is the intellect. Superior to the intellect is the great self, the collective intellect. The unmanifest is superior to the great self. The cosmic self is superior to the unmanifest. There is nothing higher than the cosmic self. That marks the end of all growth. That is the highest goal anyone can attain. The self is hidden in all beings. It is not noticed. Only the discerning seers, through their sharp penetrating intellects, can perceive it. A wise person makes all his organs go back into the mind into the enlightening intellect, the enlightening intellect into the collective intellect, in other words, the great self, or Hiranyagarbha, and the collective intellect into the pure self. So that brings us up then to verse 14. It says, O people, arise awake, meet wise people and learn from them about the self. Scholars say the path to self-knowledge is as hard to tread as walking on a razor's edge. So this is a call to people steeped in sense pleasures. They know nothing better than that. Taking pity on them, the Upanishad is asking them to arise and shake off their delusion. They think that that which is gross and immediate is everything. This is a mistake. There are higher things, not easily perceptible perhaps, that give more joy and more enduring joy also. Seek the highest, the best, and the greatest. Seek that which will never perish. Such a thing is there, but you do not know it. Go to people who know and ask them. Hurry, do not waste time, thinking that what you have now is all that exists by way of pleasure. It is a delusion you are suffering from. Shake off that delusion. Go to the right teachers, and they will direct you. They will show you the path of self-knowledge. It is a difficult path, as difficult as treading a razor's sharp edge. But never mind. If some people have gone along that path and reached the goal, surely you can do it also. Ask the teachers and they will tell you the secret of their success. The secret may be zeal, hard work, and perseverance. Whatever the price, be ready to pay. Why should self-knowledge be simple and easy to attain? The Upanishads nowhere says that it is easy to get. Rather, it says again and again it is difficult. It is, in fact, the most difficult of all things to attain. And because it is difficult, it is more precious and satisfying than anything else. But though difficult, everyone can attain this self-knowledge, given the right kind of zeal and hard work, and aided by the guidance of a good teacher. Who cares for trash when a pure diamond is available? It is simply a question of making the right choice and working hard enough to get it. The delusion referred to in this verse is that of taking unreal things to be real. For instance, mistaking a mirage to be real water, or mistaking a rope to be a snake in a dark place. This is how ignorant people mistake sense objects, such as youth, beauty, wealth, etc., which are perishable, to be imperishable. Their misery is because of this delusion. So people rise awake. And Swami Varadananda stopped not until the goal is reached. And this idea is that this reality, this infinite reality, is there within each person, but very few people actually ever experience it because they think that what they are experiencing through the body and through the mind and so on is the reality of things, the only reality. And so they get totally absorbed in that, and because of that, they fail to see, this higher truth, which is actually there within each person. And it's actually the soul, the spirit, is the most important part of each person. What we experience through our body and through our mind and our intellect and our various talents and abilities like music or mathematics or anything, all these things, these are just like the tip of the iceberg. The great majority of what we are is kind of below the surface. And but yet it's something that's always there. And this is the thing, is that this highest truth, this greatest truth that they speak of in the scriptures, is something that's always there, is something that can never be lost. Now in some traditions, some teachings, they have the idea, that if you're good, you go to heaven for all eternity, but if you're bad, you go to hell for all eternity, and then you're just lost. But the truth that the Upanishads, the scriptures speak of, can never be lost because it's what we actually are. Everything else ultimately goes back to that one truth. We can have experiences in our personal life. We have kind of good days and bad days. We can have very happy experiences. We can also have very terrible experiences. Also, in the evolution of the jiva, the individual soul, it can go up and down. It can kind of go up high to heaven or down into a deeper hell. But all these things are temporary. They come and go. But underlying all of these different experiences that come is the reality of who we are. And that reality is the kind of infinite, eternal truth of the Brahman. And so this is all we have to do. Our whole job is not acquiring something that we don't have, but it's finding something that's there, but we've lost awareness of it. You know, in America, back in the 1930s, 40s, there was a famous comedian called W.C. Fields. He was very well known back in those days. And he was very kind of paranoid that one day he would be kind of lost without money or anything. So as he was in show business, he'd travel all around, and as he'd go to different cities, he would make, deposit money in the banks in the local cities, but after a while he couldn't remember where the money was. And we're like that. We have this wonderful treasure inside, this tremendous wealth inside, but we've forgotten where it is. And then we're wandering around kind of in poverty. I've used the example before how if you've got a treasure buried in your backyard, and it may be worth $1 million, but if you don't know that that treasure's there, it doesn't do you any good at all. Theoretically, you're a millionaire. Theoretically, yes, you're Brahman. You're all this wonderful, yes, that's what you are, theoretically, but if you don't know it's there, it doesn't do you any practical good. And we go through life, it's like a prince, born in the palace, belongs to the palace, but then he develops amnesia. And he's out wandering the streets, panhandling, begging for money and things, not realizing that all the time he belongs back in the palace. And that's all the time we belong back with God, back with the source of this whole universe, but we've forgotten that, and now we're wandering through this world. And every now and then we get a little crumb of happiness or joy, and we say, oh, good. But really, the whole infinite bliss of the divine is there within us if we only know how to find it. And so just as if you have a treasure in your backyard, you have to first of all hear about the treasure, know it's there, and then the next thing then you have to get a shovel and start digging. And that's hard work. It's not pleasant necessarily, but it's only by digging. Eventually then you uncover the treasure, and now it's yours. Now you're the millionaire. Now all that money, all that treasure, that's yours because you've been able to find it and actually own it. So the whole gist of all the Upanishads and the Vedas is that there's this wonderful reality there, but we have to make it part of our actual experience before it does us any good. In this world, our experience is of the pairs of opposites. There's good and there's bad. There's pleasure, there's pain, there's happiness, and there's sorrow. And like that, we fluctuate up and down, like waves going up and down. Sometimes we're happy, high state, and other times we sink down and we get depressed or unhappy. But like that, it's always kind of going up and down. But underlying all that up and down and pattern is the permanent, eternal reality of our being. As soon as that begins to come into our consciousness, then it begins to transform our experience. It may be hard to believe, but this very life, which can be very boring or depressing or unhappy now, can become filled with bliss and inspiration and joy if we start to make the connection with our real self, with this underlying spiritual reality. The same life, the same job, the same kind of situations in life can be totally transformed if our consciousness becomes transformed. And this is the idea that most people, everybody, In this world, they're trying to find happiness. They're searching for happiness. They're searching for love. They're searching for kind of peace and safety and lack of fear. But they they don't know where to find it. They think they're going to find it outside, from another person or another situation or more money or something like this. This is what's going to bring their fulfillment or their happiness. But the happiness that they're seeking, what everybody is seeking, is actually something that's going to be found only within ourselves, within our own consciousness. And when you find it there, then it transforms, changes your whole experience. It's not by getting a bigger house that you're going to be happy. But once you become happy, then you'll find that the house you're in now is just fine. Everything becomes kind of fine. And so this is what we need to do. It's this truth, this tremendous truth, of all the power, the glory, the wisdom, the love of God is within each individual, and is our own actual real self, our truest nature. But we have to realize that. We have to experience that. And so, as Swami Vivekananda said, once you rise awake and throw off the delusion that you're sheep. Yeah, he gave the parable that once there was a tiger, a mother tiger, and she was about to give birth to it, and she saw a flock of sheep. But while she was attacking the sheep, she gave birth to a little tiger cub and died, giving birth. And so the little tiger cub was there, and the sheep, they kind of adopted it. They took care of it and all, and it grew up with the sheep, thinking it was a sheep, and eating like the sheep, eating grass like the sheep, and bleeding like the sheep, and everything. And then one day another tiger came along, and he was amazed to see that in this flock of sheep, which were all trying to run away from him, there was a tiger there, also running away. And so he grabbed the tiger by the neck. And then he took it over to a pond, body water, and he said, look, I'm a tiger, you're a tiger, just like me. And he said, look into the lake. You'll see your face looks just exactly like my face. We're the same thing. And this is what the Guru does. We're all in this world, wandering around like sheep, thinking, oh, we're just these poor human beings subject to all kinds of problems and difficulties. The Guru comes along, who knows who he is, what he is, and then he takes the disciple and he shows, look, you're also your spirit. You're not the matter, you're not the physical being, you're this wonderful spiritual being. And gradually he reveals the person's nature, so that instead of going through life as this very kind of limited, often incompetent type person, you realize, the whole glory of divinity is there within. The whole presence of God is behind me. And that person becomes transformed. And the Ramakrishna Mission publishes a magazine out of Chennai called Vedanta Keshri. And that means the lion of Vedanta. And this is what Swami Vivekananda said, that you're all lions, you're all wonderful children of God, you're all these children of immortal bliss. But you have to reason. He said, arouse, awake, arise, throw off the delusion that you're sheep, and realize that you're all embodiments of divinity. And so this is what the whole kind of the spiritual teachings are all about. And it's very difficult for most people to get a grasp on this. That, I'm really not human being, I'm really spirit. But if you can somehow begin to establish a sense of connection with a presence that's within you, and this comes that as a person begins to kind of spend time going inside, meditating, gradually you become aware that there's this a deeper presence there, and gradually you begin to realize that presence brings with it peace, confidence, a sense of security, a sense of safety, fearlessness, abhyaya. And slowly you find things that everything starts to get back into good shape again. You start to feel normal like like you're being protected. You're being guided, protected, looked after. And this is because that presence of the divine is there within, and it can bring you protection, guidance, love, everything you need, as long as you're connected with it, as long as you're in touch with it. Then you see everything getting transformed, and the life which was so troublesome before, it just that melts away. And instead there's this wonderful, kind of glorious feeling of being in the hands of God and being kind of led and guided by God, and then your whole life becomes transformed. So now we go to verse 15. We're almost at the very end of this chapter. So that which is soundless, touchless, formless, and odorless, that which is eternal, undecaying, which is without beginning and without end, superior even to Hiranyagarbha, and constant. Having known that self, one can be free from death. So the goal of life is to know the self. But what is the self like? It is difficult to describe it because it is without attributes, and it is not like anything else we know. This is why nothing positive is said in describing it. Only negative terms are used: formless, soundless, tasteless, and so on. It is in fact beyond thought and speech. So the self is described as superior to Hiranyagarbha, Maha, because the self is the cause, and Hiranyagarbha is the effect. The effect is always dependent on the cause. So this is why the latter is superior to the former. The way to self-knowledge is difficult, but both the Upanishads and the ancient sages say it is attainable. And by attaining it, one becomes free from birth and death. So that self which we see, the self with the capital S, as it is indescribable. It's not something you can put into words or put into human concepts. And it makes it very difficult for human beings to understand, because it's something that's beyond the way kind of our mind works. You know, one place Swami Varadananda said that if we were cows, we'd have to think of God as a great big cow, because that's all you can imagine in your mind. And I think that in human experience, we tend to anthropomorphize, or tend to make God like a man, a very good person, a very powerful person, and so forth, but still kind of a human being. And it's very difficult to understand God as He actually is. It's actually impossible to understand God actually as He is, because the mind knows things by forming concepts, by forming ideas. And in order to do that, you have to have kind of an object, or even a mental kind of imagination of something outside yourself, that you can say, okay, God is like a chair, or God is like this or that. But Brahman, the reality, the higher self, is something that's kind of beyond mind. It's not something that's outside, but it's something that's deep inside, as the inner consciousness. And so it's it doesn't have any particular form, any particular shape. But even though it's kind of indescribable and hard to get kind of enthused about, it seems like a metaphysical principle or something rather than a real being, at the same time, it is something beyond Hiranyagarbha. Now, as you know, Hiranyagarbha, this is the cosmic mind. The whole universe is contained within Hiranyagarbha. Brahman, though, this self that they're talking about, which is our own highest self, is something higher, even than Hiranyagarbha, which is the source of the whole universe. So it's something very vast and very kind of big. And, if you look out of the universe at all the galaxies, the stars and things that are there, you realize that what you're seeking is something even higher than that, and that is actually is your own inner self, the reality of your own inner being. Then you can get some appreciation. And also, even the person who's on the path of bhakti, on the path of devotion, in the beginning, your approach would tend to be personal. You think of God in a particular form. Maybe Rama, maybe Krishna, maybe Christ, maybe Buddha. Like that, you have a certain kind of personal concept of God. But as your devotion deepens, you realize that this kind of mental image, this concept, is like a barrier, that you want to get closer to God, you want to go deeper. And this is when you start moving from kind of the form, the very human idea of God, into the reality of God. And so gradually that grows and eventually leads to the realization of the reality of God as He actually is. So the path is considered very difficult because it involves kind of redirecting the whole concept of reality, but at the same time it is attainable. And we come to verse 16. It says that if a thoughtful person keeps hearing and narrating this eternal story of the death throe of Nachiketa, and that Nachiketa heard, he is elevated to the status of Brahman and is respected as such. So the present verse, like the foregoing verses, is an eulogy of self-knowledge. In fact, the story of Yama and Nachiketa is included only to emphasize the importance of self-knowledge and its benefit. The story is eternal because it deals with the eternal self. It is as if Yama has been explaining self-knowledge to Nachiketa from time immemorial. But it is not that everyone can benefit from the story of death in Nachiketa. Only a serious-minded person who is capable of discriminating between right and wrong can be benefited when he hears it from someone who has already realized the self. Such a person then becomes transformed and attains the status of Brahman. So by hearing this story, as you know, the Katha Upanishad is the story about Nachiketa, the little boy. He went to the house of Yama, was given 3 boons by Yama, and then Yama began to teach him the truth about the ultimate reality of the self. And so it says that if anybody hears this, if a thoughtful person hears about this story, then he can eventually attain the status of Brahman. But and this comes from hearing the truth. But first of all, the person has to be receptive to it. You can have the most wonderful teachings, the most wonderful spiritual teachings, and a great majority of people, it'll just go in one ear and out the other. It won't make any impression at all. But for those who are kind of ready for it, then it can have a tremendous impact. In particular, somebody who has an inner yearning for God, but up to now hasn't been exposed to teachings, it can change their whole life to understand these teachings are here and to realize that these higher truths are here. So this is verse 16. Now we come to 17. Verse 17, and this is the last verse in this chapter. So if a person whose mind is pure and clear recites the story of Nachiketa and death in an assembly of Brahmins, or persons seeking Brahman, or at the time when relatives are offering gifts as a token of their respect to a departed person, then that hearing will bring infinite reward to all concerned, those who explain and those who hear. Indeed, it will bring infinite reward. So the repetition at the end of the verse is only to emphasize that this shall happen. The nature of the self is a difficult subject. It is difficult and also mysterious. Thus, it should not be talked about everywhere. One may talk about it only to self-disciplined persons, otherwise it may create confusion in people's minds. The story of Nachiketa and death is basically a discourse on the self. If you recite this discourse as death told it to Nachiketa, it will do you immense good. And it will also do good to those who listen. but both the speaker and the listeners should be self-disciplined people. Through self-discipline, people's minds become pure and clear, and those with such minds can easily grasp the subtle nature of the self. And here is the third chapter of the first part of the Katha Upanishad. So anyway, so this brings us to the end then of part 1 of the Upanishad. And next we'll come to part 2 of the chapter 1. So any questions so far? So then you remember how at the beginning of chapter 2 in part 1, in the very first verse, it said that the good and the pleasant are two different things. They serve different purposes. Each is, however, a bondage, though not in the same sense. He who chooses the good does good to himself, but he who chooses the pleasant, and this is the purpose of life. So remember this, in chapter 1, in part 1, it had been the story about Nachiketa, how his father was performing his worship, and then Nachiketa, little boy, he went to the house of Yama. Yama wasn't there for 3 days, and so then when Yama came back, he granted 3 boons to Nachiketa, and one of which was Nachiketa asked that some people say that after a person dies, he continues to exist. Some people say he doesn't. He says, I want to know the truth about this. In other words, I want to know the truth about the reality of our nature, of ourself. And so, after tempting him and offering him various things, various pleasant things, then Yama began to teach him, and the instruction began in chapter 2. And as we mentioned at the time, that Bhagavad Gita, the same thing. That chapter 1 is just setting the scene. Arjuna and Krishna, they go out between the two armies, they see, and then Arjuna becomes confused. He doesn't know what to do. Then in chapter 2 is when Krishna begins the teaching of the Gita. So similar here. In chapter 2, the teachings began, and the very first thing it said was that the good and the pleasant are two different things. And each is kind of open to us. It's like there's a fork in the road. We can go after the pleasant, trying to enjoy life as much as we can, trying to get as much satisfaction and pleasure that we can out of the world, or we can follow that's the path of praise, the good, the pleasant, or we can follow the path of Shreyas, the good, and begin to want to know what's the truth about things. How do I find God? How do I find Spirit? How do I find the kind of the ultimate answers of life? And so he said, through the path of the pleasant, people get more and more caught up into the world. They get more and more forgetful of anything spiritual, anything other than the physical world, and so they get kind of distracted and lost. But those who follow the path of Shreyas, the good, seeking truth, those are gradually moving towards God. Slowly, the infinity of their divinity begins to unfold within them, and they're kind of on the right path. So now we have finished in part 1, and we come now to part 2, chapter 1. And again, this in part 2 starts off right away in verse 1 with a very kind of significant verse. It says, the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw his sense organs from external objects and see the self within. And the commentary says that the self is within us, yet we do not see it. This is because our organs are outgoing. They can see things outside, but not inside. The self is the real master of the body-mind complex, And it is within us, hidden. It is also very subtle. The organs can perceive gross objects outside, but not the self, which is our inmost being. The only way to reach the self within is to withdraw the organs from external things and turn them inside. The process is like reversing the course of a river and pushing it back to its source. It is a hard task, but it can be done. It is a matter of practice. Those who succeed attain immortality. So in this first verse, we get that the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent effect that they are by nature outgoing. And this is kind of another major theme that carries out throughout this Upanishad, is that by our nature, we tend to be outgoing, absorbed in what's going outside of ourselves, seeing what's going on, hearing, and enjoying things, reacting to the events in our life, to what goes on outside, what other people do, and so forth. But the self, the truth that we're seeking, is something that's inside. And this, again, it goes back to part one, with the idea of the two paths of the pleasant and the good, the prayas and shreyas. The pleasant means you're getting absorbed outside. You're getting absorbed in the world that you can experience through the senses, and you're trying to enjoy that world, trying to find more pleasure, trying to get more wealth, trying to get better relationships, and like that. All of our attention is absorbed in the world that we see outside ourselves. The path of the Shreyas was a process of going within and see, well, who am I? And this is one of the basic approaches to truth, is particularly made well known by Ramana Maharshi, Vichara, self-inquiry. Who am I? Trying to discover, well, who am I really? So this begins a process of turning back inside, and this is where you begin to uncover the truth. Now here in part two, it immediately echoes that same idea, that the problem is that the Lord has created the sense organs so that they're outgoing. We look at it with our eyes, and all we can see is what's outside, what's coming in through the eyes. And we hear what's coming, the sounds that are coming in through the ear and all that. And then that gives us a reality. And then we're constantly absorbed in that reality. And because of that, we're not aware of who we actually are. I remember the first thing Swami Varadananda said to me when I came to Chicago was that the Divine Mother shows us pictures, and we try to grab those pictures. So this is where we're seeing pictures, and we're trying to grab the pictures, and in the process, we're not aware who's trying to grab the pictures. Who's there? And this is what is the cause of our ignorance, of our failure to understand that even though we are spirit right now, that's who we are, still we're not aware of it because all of our attention is here. There is and this is called Maya. Now, Maya is like a projection. And it's like a movie that goes on. And there are two aspects of Maya. One is called the veiling aspect, which tends to cover the presence of Brahman, the presence of God. Second is the projecting aspect, which then creates all kinds of worlds, all kinds of experiences out there. And what it is a virtual reality, like a dream. There's a movie out now. You probably haven't seen it. It's called Matrix. But it actually was filmed in Chicago, I think. But the idea behind Matrix is that all these people in this world, they're all going around and acting and all, but actually they're all inside a big computer. And the computer is projecting what they're experiencing, but all the time they're actually living kind of in that computer. Well, this is kind of a virtual reality. You think you're experiencing something. You think, oh, I'm here, I'm in this room, but actually you're not. You're in God, but you're not aware of it. A similar idea is the dream. Now, when we're asleep, when we're dreaming, that dream is our world. We're in that dream. The dream may be a very happy dream, or maybe a nightmare, maybe a horrible dream. But while we're dreaming, that world is our reality, and it's the only reality we know. Now, normally we tend to think in religious life or spiritual life that it's kind of an ongoing struggle trying to get better and better. But in terms of realization, what that means is not becoming just a better person, but actually waking up from the dream. Now, in the dream, we may be having, maybe it's a terrible nightmare. Something's chasing you. Tiger's chasing you. No matter what you do, you can't seem to escape from the tiger. But then you wake up, and now, oh, you're like, oh, everything's fine. I've always been just safe and sound here in bed. Everything's fine. There's no tiger chasing me. There's no danger. Nothing's wrong. Everything is good. In the same way, when a person becomes realized, when he becomes aware of who he is, it's like waking up from a dream. Suddenly that whole human existence, which he was struggling through, which he was fighting with, suddenly that whole human existence, human reality kind of disappears, and what's there then is the realization that, oh, I'm this eternal, immortal self. I'm with God. I've always been with God. Nothing can harm me. Nothing can make me unhappy. Nothing can disturb me. Everything is fine, because it's a different reality. And this is what makes it so hard to understand for most people. Most people have the idea that I can become spiritual, and so if I become a good person, then I go to heaven. And they'll get there. If they've been good, they've had good karma, things, then when they leave the body, they go to some very nice realm, and they enjoy it there. And like that, but then again, they'll come back, be born again, go through another life, and so forth, as an individual. But now all of that is actually all taking place within the dream. Realization, reality, is when you wake up from the dream, and you realize there's nothing but Brahman. I'm that Brahman. Everybody else is that Brahman. Brahman is the only reality that exists. The whole universe is contained within me. Then, it's no longer you, kind of the individual having a good experience or a pleasant experience. It's now kind of moving out of the dream altogether, of good and bad, of the pairs of opposites, and opening up to realize that, everything is fine. Everything's always fine. Just as when you wake up from a nightmare, you realize, no, that was just a dream, imagination. This world, from the higher standpoint, from the spiritual standpoint, this world is just like a dream or imagination. A dream is something that you experience. And as long as you're asleep, as long as you're dreaming, that dream is real for you, and you have to work with it, you have to deal with it. But when you wake up, then you realize, I'm the children of immortal bliss. I'm the immortal child of God. Nothing can ever harm me. So, because the sense organs are built to be always looking outside, they fail to perceive, be aware of what's inside. So it's like, for example, if God is right next to you, right behind, but you're looking this way, and he's standing right behind you, he's this close to you, but you're not aware of it because you're looking in the wrong direction. And this is our condition. God is right here where we are, but we're looking in the wrong direction, and so we're not aware of it. And this is the path of praise, the pleasant. It means we keep looking out that way, and then we get our experiences. Like I said, we can have pleasant experiences, or we can have unpleasant experiences, but we'll have our dream experiences. But when we learn how to step back from that, to kind of let go of all that, we sometimes begin to look within, and then slowly we begin to uncover, realize that there's not just the visible world that we see through our senses and experience, but there's other worlds, other realities here. And eventually, you remember last week, I read a little section from Parentheses in Eternity by Joel Goldsmith, which gave the idea that everything we experience here is the result of an invisible activity that we're not aware of. We only see what's here, and what's here is the effect of something going on deeper in consciousness. And so we're always struggling around, trying to make things better by changing the effects, but not realizing that as soon as we begin to get in touch with the cause that's there within, then the changes come. And so this is our problem. So the Lord He's created the sense organs with the defect that they're always going outwards, and then creating the sense that this is reality, this is the only world there is. Whereas all the time, the reality and even the cause of what we're experiencing now is something that's invisible to the senses, but yet is within as our very own consciousness. In other words, we look out, say we see a chair. We say, okay, that chair is there. Then the question becomes, who is seeing the chair? Usually all we know is I'm seeing a chair, but we don't know who the I is that's saying I see that chair. And so like that, we have the experience, but we don't know who is there experiencing it. As we go deeper, as we begin to let go of the experience for a while, begin to look within, we gradually become aware that, oh, there's something else here that's not just the physical, not just kind of the objects, but there's something behind all this. And that's something that's behind all this is the source of all the bliss, the love, the joy, wisdom, guidance, everything we need, because that consciousness, which is behind things, it's the kind of divine source within us. Actually, as human beings, what we're trying to do, we're an expression, a manifestation of God trying to express Himself at the human level. But yet, even though we appear to be at the human level, always we're still with God. And so this is a great kind of goal. So the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect in that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw his sense organs from external objects and see the self within. So verse 2 then says, immature people run after external objects and they invariably get caught in the widespread net of death. Wise people, however, know where true immortality is. This is why they reject everything in this world, knowing that these things are short-lived. So it is true that there are many temptations in the world, and our sense organs are naturally attracted to them. But if we cannot control our sense organs, we are lost. One temptation leads to another until there seems to be no way to escape. If there is such a thing as death, this is it. It is as if death has cast a net over us, and we are caught in its meshes. This is the fate of people who are short-sighted. They are like children. They are carried away by impulses and do not consider the pros and cons of what they do. They invariably come to grief. But there are some people who are thoughtful and discriminating. They know that the world, including everything it has to offer, is ephemeral, which is why they do not want anything of it. They do not want anything of this world or even of the other world, heaven. They know that the self alone is real, and therefore they only want to know that. When they know the self, they know that they are the self. The self alone can give them peace and happiness, because peace and happiness are inside, in the self, and not outside. So immature people run after external objects, and they invariably get caught up in the widespread net of death. So this is, for example, when our body is young, when it's healthy, it gives us great pleasure. And we go out, when we're young, you can do practically anything, and next day you wake up and you feel great again. But as you find out, as you go along, get older, slowly the body starts to wear out, you get older and older and older, and eventually it gives up completely. Now, when all of our attachment, all of our desires and everything is centered on the body, then we go through the kind of the downhill spiral of the body. You know, when the body was young and healthy and full of energy, it gave us a lot of joy and pleasure. And because of that, we kind of grab hold of the body and we try to enjoy it as much as we could as we went along. But after some time, we're so used to being, grabbing hold of the body and the senses and so forth, that we don't know how to let go. And then when the body starts to deteriorate and go downhill, the consciousness, you know, it's just kind of brought downhill with us. And so even though a person may be in very serious pain or have lots of health problems or other things, still he's holding on to body consciousness. And then this is what he's kind of drugged through. So it's like you grab hold of a hot radiator and you say, oh, it's hot, it's burning, my hand's burning. And what you have to do is let go of it. You know, you can pound on the radiator, you can shout, you can do all kinds of things, but ultimately the way to get free of the burning of the suffering is to let go of it. In the same way, is once you let go of the body, even to a small extent, then you start to get free of the kind of drag of the body, of the sufferings and pains and things that come through the body. And same thing, even the mind. The mind can be brilliant. It can be a vast storehouse of knowledge and wonder and fascination. But it can also be a terrible thing. For many people, their minds are just horrible sources of guilt and fear and hatred and all kinds of things there. But when you can stand back, begin to let go a little bit of things, of what's going on in the mind, then it loses its domination over you. It doesn't disturb you the same way. We've used the example, whenever we get angry, we always say, I'm angry. And because of that, then the anger becomes very disturbing, very hard to control, and ultimately very upsetting. But if you can just stand back, and instead of saying, I'm angry, you say, there's anger in the mind. Now suddenly that anger is there, and it'll be there. You watch it, it's there for a little bit, then after some time, it'll go away, something else will come. But that anger does no longer dominate you, no longer upset you. It's just there, it's just something in the mind. In other words, when you grab hold of the body, and you say, oh yes, this is what I am, then you get some enjoyment from the body, you also get some pain from the body. When you grab hold of the mind, same thing, you get some joy, some satisfaction, some perhaps great deal more happiness than you get from the body, but you get some happiness from the mind, but you can also get a lot of misery from the mind too. So then, but when you step back from that, then it doesn't disturb you the way it did before. And basically, you don't get as much joy, as intense pleasure as a person gets when he's attached to the world, but you don't get the intense misery that can come from worldly experience. But what you do begin to get gradually is an inner joy, an inner happiness, an inner confidence, an inner peace that makes you feel, okay, I'm okay, everything's all right, everything's in good shape. That then doesn't depend on body or mind. It's something that coming out of your real self within. So this again is continuing the main theme back in the very first verse. The path of the pleasant, where we're always seeking to get some satisfaction, some accomplishment, some joy out of physical or mental existence, out of the external world, out of things outside ourselves, to the path of the Shreyas, but beginning to search within. Beginning at, well, what's inside here? Who am I? What am I? Where is God? How can I get in touch with God? And this is what meditation is gradually withdrawing your attention from the outside world, trying to bring it within, and gradually achieving a shift in consciousness. If you can truly, and basically you're going through the 3 stages of physical consciousness, then you have mental consciousness, the deeper within various layers, and then finally you come to the Atman, to the spiritual consciousness. when you reach that, then you find everything. Everything is there. Everything you need is there. Everything is, but even touching the slightest fringes of it begins to bring a sense that, okay, everything is good. I'm fine. The world would seem full of misery or full of disappointment or drudgery or things before. Suddenly, everything is filled with joy and beauty. But when we block out, it's like, and that reality is like the sun always shining, but we have the capacity to block out the sun. It's like the sun is shining brightly, but you pull down all your shades, and now you're sitting in darkness. And that's kind of where we are. Because we got so absorbed in senses, so absorbed in our kind of personal life and desires and ambition, we've kind of shut out the light, and then we're sitting in darkness and complaining that things are dark. But all the time the sun is there if only we learn how to open the shades and let it begin to come in. So the immature people, like I say, are like children. They see things attractive and they try to grab, try to enjoy them. But the wiser people, they realize that none of these things are going to be satisfied. And you realize, for example, a lot of people, so many people, they spend their time trying to make a lot of money. But when you begin to get a little kind of spiritual discrimination, you realize, money isn't worth anything. I mean, they said, once you've got a roof over your head and 3 meals a day, whatever, then you don't really need anything else. I remember when I first came here, Swami Varadananda, he had me work before I kind of joined the order. He had me work in a little shop in Old Town. It was run by one of our devotees, Mr. Gadboli. It's called Bombay Street Car. It's all like things from knickknacks from India, as well as jewelry, little jewelry and things like that from America. But I realized that I wasn't interested in buying a single thing in that world. And I realized our whole economy would collapse to people who like me, because they were just earrings and little. At that time, the big thing was spoon rings. They would take a spoon and bend it around and turn it into a ring. And people going, they buy all this stuff, right? I just couldn't understand it. So anyway, and this is our consumer economy depends on people rushing out and buying all these little trinkets that nobody actually needs. So anyway, the immature people they're like children. They see, this looks good. I want this, and I want that. But as a person matures, and actually this is the spiritual evolution, is kind of like growing up. In the beginning, the souls just want to play. They just want to go enjoy the world. It's like a big amusement park, and they want to ride all the different rides. But then, as the soul gets more mature, it begins to take a purpose. He wants to begin to grow spiritually. He wants to begin to use this life to accomplish something, to develop spiritual qualities, to help people, to serve people like that. But eventually, it begins to realize that, I just want to be with God. And eventually, slowly, he kind of retires from the world altogether. Says, there's nothing in the world that interests me anymore. I want to be with God. Souls, they're all different stages. Some are at the childhood stage where you just, they just want to run around and play. Others start to move towards the truth. In the highest type, the wisest people, they realize that the only important thing is to realize God. And because that is where true immortality is. And so they just lose interest in anything in this world. All the things that people normally chase after, they just have no interest. They outgrow them and then begin to seek the higher spiritual truth. So that's it. So any questions? Okay, so as you know, this week we're having a retreat at Ganges with Swami Varadananda. He's up there now, and all of our congregations up there now too. So anyway, we got how to be spiritual. And then on Sunday, he's going to be speaking there in Ganges on symbolism in Hinduism, I think. And I'll be speaking this Sunday, since he's gone, I'll be speaking on the Guru at 11 o'clock this Sunday, and then we have a regular class that's coming up. And I don't think there's anything else coming up in the next week or so. Om Asatoma Sagamya Tamasoma Jyotirgamya Mrityunam Amritam Gamya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Om peace, peace, peace.